So welcome to this latest video 162 Maths, and in this video we'll be going over the GCSE Maths higher topic of cumulative frequency with the focus of going through some past exam questions. Now also in this video we'll also go through what it is you need to revise regarding this topic. Now a copy of the questions that we go through in this video are available for you to download simply by clicking on the link in the description below. Right then, now before we get started working through some cumulative frequency past exam questions, let's just have a quick recap over what it is you actually need to know about cumulative frequency. Now, if any of this doesn't make any sense or you're not too sure about how to work these out, I'll include some links in the description below that go through how to find each of these things when related to a cumulative frequency diagram. Now, the key points of what you need to know when revising this particular topic is the first one is the obvious one, which is know how to draw a cumulative frequency diagram. Now, for this, you need to make sure that you're aware that you always plot at the upper bound of the group and that you do join the points up, and that the last value should always be the highest frequency. So if you've got 100 people, then that last value needs to be 100. If there's 80 people, that needs to be 80. And don't always automatically think that the highest value, particularly when you're reading information from a cumulative frequency diagram, automatically think that the highest number on the vertical scale or the highest frequency is the top frequency of the curve. Sometimes they always go a little bit further. So for example, it may say 100, but actually the cumulative frequency diagram finishes at 80. Now the next thing you also then need to be able to do is to be able to know how to find the median and the interquartile range. Now for this, to find the median, it's all about the position. Now here the position of the median is always, so this number here is always going to be 0.5 times the total frequency, or half the total frequency, or aka total frequency divided by 2. So that's where the median value actually is going to be, but then the actual median value is this number here. So that there is the median value. Now to find the lower quartile, well, that's going to be at the 25% mark. So if you've already drawn the median, which most often you usually are, the lower quartile is going to be between 0 and the median. So this number here is going to be the total frequency divided by 4. So that's where the lower quartile is going to be. And the actual value is this number here. So that there is the lower quartile value that you need to quote. Then for the upper quartile, that's going to be somewhere up here. Now this value here is going to be 3/4 times the total frequency, or the total frequency multiplied by 3 divided by 4. So this is where the upper quartile is. Then as soon as it hits the curve, it's this number here that's going to be your upper quartile value. Now the next thing you also need to be able to do is know how to find the frequencies of less than or more than. So typically part B or part C of a question might ask you how many were, let's say, less than 140 or 160. So what you need to do is you need to go up. So for this one, you need to go up to the curve and then go across. So it's up to the curve and then across. And remember that the value here is the less than value, and that gives you the less than value. So if you want more than, so the more than value is going to be or the total frequency minus the less than value. Now if that makes absolutely no sense to you at all, do not worry, we're going to go through some examples of where we'll be finding both of those two. Now other types of questions that come up are to find the boundary which has the top X%, so the top 5 or top 10% or top 25%. Well, the top 25% is going to be the upper quartile. That's going to tell you what that is. But in terms of like the top 10% or the top 5%, what you need to do there is work out the percentage and then find the frequency. So again, we'll go through similar questions that are involved in the topic test that we're going to go through. Then we move on to how to draw a box and whisker diagram or a box plot from a cumulative frequency diagram, and that is going to be using these three values. Now in terms of the lower value, the lowest value is always where the cumulative frequency starts, and the highest value is always going to be the top frequency. So from this you can then find and draw your, let's say, box plot directly underneath your cumulative frequency diagram. Now other topics that are linked to cumulative frequency are obviously box plots, proportion, where you've got to work out fractions, work out percentages, not so much decimals, but again looking at proportions, averages, and also probability. Now just a little reminder before we get started working through these questions that all of these questions are taken from non-calculator papers. Now if you're wanting a copy of the questions that we go through in this video, then all you need to do is just simply click on the link in the description. So looking at question 1, it says the times taken to complete a puzzle are shown in the table below. And it says Andrew uses information to draw a cumulative frequency diagram, and the question says complete the cumulative frequency table. So what we need to do is we actually need to write down where these points are at these values here. Now, so what we need to do is look at the graph and we need to find these frequencies here. So to complete the frequency diagram, and actually I've got the frequency so I can actually work that out. So here we've got 6, then we want to count how many are less than 40. Well, that's going to be 6 plus 11, which is 17. Then we've got 17 plus 17, which is 34. 13 plus 34 is going to be 47, and then add the 3, which gives us 50. It then says for 1b for us to write down 2 mistakes that Andrew made when drawing his graph. So if I just zoom out and just about see the graph and where I've got to write. So the first thing that he has done incorrectly is that he's plotted at the midpoints instead of the upper bounds. And his second mistake is that 34 has been plotted at 32. So again, a mistake that he's made for this point here. Then moving on to question 2, and if I just zoom out. So question 2 says complete the cumulative frequency table. So again, all we're doing is just doing a running total of the upper bound. So here we've got 32 plus 46 gives me 78. Then 78 plus 17, which is 95, and then 95 plus 5 is 100. It then says to draw the cumulative frequency diagram. Now remember, when you are plotting, you need to make sure that you're plotting at the upper value and that you start your curve at the lowest bound. So this is where you start at 0, at this point here. And we also know that it should be maximum at 100, at 170 rather, which it is. So you should have something that looks like this. Now I've connected my points with straight lines just because it's not easy on the computer to do this, but again, with a cumulative frequency graph, you need to make sure that you are joining those points up. If it does say cumulative frequency polygon, you need to make sure you're using straight lines, whereas if you're doing a cumulative frequency graph, then it should be a nice smooth curve. Now if your curve skills aren't the best, then one thing I would recommend is you join the points up with a straight line, and then what I would then do is just go over your straight line and just smooth those curve points up so it looks something like this. Now yours should be definitely a lot better than mine, as it's a lot easier doing this on paper than it is to do on the computer. Then for 2c, it says use your graph to estimate the number of girls who are less than 152 centimeters tall. Now for this, what I need to do is I need to find where 152 is. Now that's going to be at the 4th square, little square from 150. So this is where 152 is. Then what I then need to do is to draw a line until it hits my cumulative frequency curve and then project across. And this here would give me my frequency, which I roughly make out to be, if I just ignore that line there, if I just use the straight lines just to make it a little bit more accurate, just only because I'm not trusting in my curve, that I make that out to be roughly maybe around 15. Now again, the mark scheme may differ, it all depends on roughly where your plot is going to be, but you need to make sure that you draw a line. So draw a line up from 152 centimeters till it meets the curve, and then quote the horizontal value. Now these are generally the steps in which you find those frequencies. Now again, every answer is going to be slightly different, so if you've got access to certain mark schemes when you're doing questions like these, they may give, let's say, what the most common answer or the commonest range of values you'd get, but as long as you're drawing those lines on your cumulative frequency, do not just use your finger. Make sure you're drawing those lines, marking it on your diagram to make sure that you're maximizing getting full marks. Moving on to question 3, it says that a vet collects data about weights of the same breed of cat, and question 3a says complete the cumulative frequency graph of this data. So again, all we need to do is just fill in the table. So you should have 9, 31, 68, 88, and then finally 100. And then we need to plot the graph, which I've just done in advance just to save a bit of time. And then it then says for 3b, the vet considers the top 20% of the cats to be overweight. Use your graph to estimate the lowest weight that this would be considered overweight. So what we need to do is find the 80% mark. Now 80% of 100. Now 100 is the total frequency. And with it being on a non-calculated paper, you'd expect that to be relatively easy, which is going to be 80. So I'm looking for this 80 mark. So what I need to do then is to draw a straight horizontal line from 80 until it hits the curve, and then I then need to project downwards. And I make out that it's going to be at this point here, which I reckon is about 3.25. And whatever number that is, that's the number you want to quote. And again, for the 2 marks, you need to make sure that you're drawing a horizontal line from 80 till it hits your curve, and then whatever number you want to quote here, 3.2, 3.3, 3.15, whatever you want to quote, as long as you read off that value, you should get the 2 marks. Moving on to question 4, it says the table shows the ages of teachers at a school, and again we just need to complete the cumulative frequency diagram. So the numbers you should have in your cumulative frequency column should be 8, 34, 76, 94 and 100. Then we just need to join those points up, and again had a quite a poor attempt at drawing a curve, but it should make sure that your points do go through each of your plotted points. Now again, if you can't be accurate, just try and be as close as possible. They're not looking for preciseness, they're just looking for, because obviously when this particularly when they're created the axes in themselves, like we've got here, which is a lot thankful because it's really a nightmare to do this in class and do your own scale, that you just want to get as close as possible. So yeah, fear not. The next question then says use your graph to estimate the median age. So again, 50%, which is the median of the total frequency, which is 100. Now again, if that was different, it's not always going to be at 50. If the total frequency is 80, then the 50% mark would be at 40. So it's at 50. So then what I then need to do is at 50, which is this point here, is draw a horizontal line, and then whatever number this is, and again yours might be slightly different to mine, but I make out that number to be roughly about 43. And there we go. So whatever number this is, that's the number that you quote. And again, do not forget to draw your lines. The next question then says use your graph to estimate the interquartile range. So halfway between 0 and 50 is 25. So if this is 30, then 25 is going to be somewhere here. So again, I'm not being accurate at all, but I reckon that the lower quartile is almost actually for C. So So I get my lower quartile value to be about 38. Now my upper quartile, which is going to be at 75. So if this is 70, 75 is going to be halfway between there and 80. So this is my upper quartile until it hits the curve, and I make that out to be roughly around about 50. So the upper quartile is 50. And again, your values may be completely different. And then the interquartile range is going to be this number, which is 50 for me, take away this number, which is 38 for me, and I work that out to be around about 12. But again, yours might be slightly different, might be higher, might be lower. Just use whatever's on your graph, and that should give you the marks for it, because you'll definitely get follow-through marks if you've made any slight errors. Moving on to question 5, it says the cumulative frequency graph shows information about the height of 120 sunflowers, and it says use the graph to estimate the median height of the sunflowers. So if I just zoom out just so that we can see the whole graph in all its entirety, so there it is, and let me just zoom up so you can see it there. Now in terms of this, the total frequency is 120, so the median is going to be at 50%, and 50% of 120 is 60. So what I need to do is at 60 I then need to draw a horizontal line, and that's my median, and then as soon as it hits a curve I then need to project downwards, in which, because this cumulative frequency is pre-drawn and the curve's already drawn, everyone should really have the same answer, and I make that out to be roughly at 108. So this number here is 108, but again, you quote whatever you've written there. Then moving on to B, it says estimate the proportion of sunflowers that have a height greater than, and let me just go back to that number there, it says greater than 140. So what I need to do then is find 140 on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis rather. So here's 140. I then need to project upwards. So again, using a straight edge, drawing your line, making sure you're doing that, even though it seems like a line's already been drawn for you because you're using the grid. Again, that should be straight. And then as soon as it hits the curve, you then want to project horizontally. And again, because this is pre-drawn, everyone should be the same, and I make out to be 110. So looking at this, 110, now remember that the vertical axis always tells you the number that's less than that number. So 110 are less than 140. So if there are 120 altogether, so therefore 120 minus 110 is going to give me an answer of 10. Then moving on to question 6, it says the cumulative frequency graph shows the cholesterol level of 50 meat eaters. And it says for A, cholesterol level of over 5.5 is considered too high. Work out an estimate of the percentage of people who have high cholesterol. So let's have a look at 5.5. So 5.5 is, I make out to be just there. Now if I find whereabouts that is till it hits the curve, which is just about there, and I'm just going to draw a bit of a shady vertical line, and then as soon as it hits that curve I then want to project across, and I make it out to be roughly about there, again using a ruler, and I make that out to be roughly around about 34. So then I know that 34 are less than 5.5. So I want to work out the people that have more than that. So more than 5.5 is going to be 50 minus 34, which is 16. I then need to work that as a percentage, so 16 out of a total of 50 people, multiply that by 100, and again it's just basically multiply, we're getting the denominator as 100, so if I've got 16 over 50, I want to have that as a fraction over 100, times that by 2, so I times the top number by 2, and that gives me 32, so it will be 32%. That says for 6b, the lowest cholesterol level was in the sample was 3.2, the highest was 7.8. Draw a box, a plot showing the information for the meat eaters. So from this, I know that the smallest value was 3.2. So 3.2 is there. So that's the smallest value. Don't know why I've put a W there, so let me get rid of that. And the highest value was 7.8, which is just there. And again, you need to make sure that you're using a ruler. I really can't on the computer because it's just it's going to take ages. So then what I then need to do is find the upper quartile and the lower and the median. So now the median is at 50% of the total frequency, which is at 25. The lower quartile is going to be at 12.5 and the upper quartile is going to be at 37.5. And again, how I've worked those values out, that's from 50% of 50, that's 25% of 50, and that's 75% of 50. So 12.5 I make out to be, well, if that's halfway, 12.5 is going to be somewhere here, and then project downwards. And I make out that value to be roughly around about 4.8. So lower quartile, 4.8. My median value is at 25, which is about there. So this is my median value. This is my lower quartile. And I make out that median value to be roughly about 5.1. And the upper quartile, which is at 37.5, which is roughly around there. And that's my upper quartile. And then project downwards. I'm not helpful with that blue line in the way, but I make that out to be roughly around about 5.8. So then what I then need to do is I then need to plot these in my diagram. So then moving on from there, I've got 4.8, 5.1 and 5.8. So I've got 4.8, which is there, and I've got 5.1, which is about there, and I've got 5.8, which is roughly about there. And again, just make it look like a box plot, and we should have something that looks like that. But again, hopefully yours is going to be a lot neater with the use of a ruler. Then says part C, 50 vegetarians also had their cholesterol levels tested. The box plot shows the results, and it says compare the cholesterol levels of the meat eaters and the vegetarians. So again, if you've watched the video on box plots, this is getting annoying, so let me go back to that question. So again, when commenting on comparing box plots, you always want to comment on two things. You want to compare on where the median is, which is the average, and compare on the consistency, which is the size of the box. So on average, and you want to say something along the lines of that vegetarians had a lower cholesterol level than meat eaters. And again, you want to quote some maths, and that is because they had a lower median. If you want to quote the values, that's fine. Then we can also say that meat eaters were more consistent as they had a lower interquartile range. Then moving on to question 7, it says the cumulative frequency graph shows the speeds of 50 vehicles in a residential road. The speed limit of the road was 30 miles per hour. Motorists who have a greater than the speed limit plus 10% plus 2 miles per hour were given a fine. And it says estimate the number of motorists who received a fine. So let's first of all work out the speed that you need to travel to get a fine. So here the speed limit was 30 miles per hour. 10% is 3 miles per hour, and we add 2 miles per hour to that. So we get a total of 35 miles per hour. So what I need to do is find 35 on the horizontal axis, which is about there. Draw a line, a vertical line going up from 35. I know that's not straight, but it gets to that point. And then as soon as it's the curve, you then want to project across. And I make out that number to be roughly around about 26, 27. I'd say roughly 27. There we go. So then what we then need to do, that's 27, which is here, but we've got a total of 50 people. So it's not 27 because 27 people were less. So 27 people drove less than 35 miles per hour. So 50 minus 27, which is 23 people, were fined. So the answer then is 23. We then move on to 7b, which says the lowest recorded speed was 17, the highest speed was 52. Draw a box plot to represent the data. Well, if the lowest speed was 17, then that means that's going to go there. The high speed was 52, so that's going to go, there. And then I then need to work out the upper and the lower quartile. So from this, we've got 50. So the median is going to be at 25. The lower quartile is going to be at half of that, which is 12.5. And the upper quartile is going to be at 37.5. So then 12.5 is roughly around about there. And so I make out that that is going to be roughly round about, 27, 28. So that's the lower quartile. So the lower quartile is 27, 28. Oh, no, label that wrong. So let me do that here. So the lower quartile is roughly around about 27. Then the upper quartile is at 37.5, which is about here. So again, with a straight line, the upper quartile, then project downwards, and you get a value of around about 41, looking at it, just about there. So about 41, and then the median is at 25, which is here, and that is roughly around about 33, I would say. So then what I then need to do is plot these values here. So I've got 27, 33 and 41. So 27 is about there, 33 is about there, and 41 is about there. And then all I then need to do is just complete the Venn diagram again. Please do make sure that you're using a ruler, and it should definitely look a lot neater than what I've got on the screen.